All right, so I'm just gonna talk about different things in JavaScript, starting with arrays, and then we talk about objects and a few other options here, things here. So let's remember, how do we declare arrays? We can declare them really a few ways. The most common way is just the square brackets like that. It's literal syntax. It's called literal syntax because it is actually what we see, like if we were logging an array of something, let array equal this empty thing. What we actually see when we output stuff into a terminal, or when we return a value of an array, we're going to see this actual syntax with these square brackets. So it's called literal because we're actually writing basically what we see. You can also do a few different options. I think array.new should also do the same thing. Oh, nope. What is the way? It's a new array. New array. Yeah, new array. Another way to create an array. But square arrays, square brackets is usually the best way to do it. Arrays are lists of things, right? So we can list things by typing in a series of numbers, for instance. We can also list whatever we want. We can list strings. We can list.
Hello.
Hello.
Hey guys, how are you?
Hey Christine, we're just reviewing some JavaScript stuff.
Sure.
Talking about arrays here. So arrays are basically ways to store other values. You can store all kinds of things, including numbers, strings, even other arrays, objects, stuff like that. And you declare them like this. And in fact, if I log this now on the page, I'll see all that stuff here. It even says like, hey, there's an array here. It doesn't have anything in it because it's empty. What else can I tell you about arrays? Arrays have, in JavaScript, an array is actually a thing with built-in what they call methods. So you can manipulate this array by calling stuff on top of it. So in this case, like let's say we wanted to add another value. You could say array dot push. Here I'm declaring an array by pushing to it another thing, hi. I'm actually, when I log this, I should see this hi at the end of this array, right? Refresh the page, and there it is. What are the other methods? Do y'all remember what they might be?
Dot on shift should add hi to like the 0 space, right?
Yeah, this one, right? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then there's pop and there's shift, right? There's shift should do what?
Can't you like choose like the location and the value, or no?
Are you thinking of
else?
slice or
Possibly?
That's right. Shift does the opposite of unshift. So unshift is when you're going to add something to the beginning of an array. Shift would be
To the end.
it's when you want to take off something from the beginning of the array. So if you do array shift,
okay.
actually pop this first one off. So I refresh the page, and now I don't have that one anymore being logged.
You could also like slice the first value off, right?
Yeah, exactly. You could do that. So slice. Let's see how we do that. We could do slice 1. What do you think was going to happen here?
2 goes away.
2? Okay. William, what do you think?
Is it going to get rid of everything in front of space 1?
Okay. Yeah. Those are both good guesses. Let's find out. I'm going to refresh this page. Nothing changed. Why do you think that is here? I'll go back to the output. 1, 2, 3, 4, hello, array. 1, 2, 3, 4, hello, empty array. So this is outputting, this log is outputting the same as the original.
Yeah, I'm not sure because what does that one signify? Is that the place one? So would that be the number two, or is that something else?
Do you need different
Um,
brackets?
No, so it's actually, what we could do in this case is actually just, let's see this, what happens when we do console log array.slice. Let's see what this is outputting. I'm gonna refresh the page. Now I get 2, and hey, look at this. On line 3 of the JavaScript file, I'm getting everything except for the very first one, 2, 3, 4 hello array. Then line 5, I'm getting the original array. So this is outputting a new array of this stuff. This is still the original array. What, do you know why that might be?
Well, it sounds like slice is basically like a function or command that essentially takes the cutout. It doesn't take the remaining or the original. It takes the cutout.
Exactly. Yeah. Slice returns a copy, a new array of the sliced element. And in this case, you are exactly right. This is the first, this is the index of the beginning of the slice. So what it does is says, okay, we'll start here, index of 1, because this is always, arrays always start at 0, 1, and then it just assumes you want the rest of it. So it slices this entire thing out and returns it as a new array. Array, this original thing, is unchanged. That's different from, let's see what happens when we do splice. Now we get something totally different. Now we can see in line 3, we're getting that same array, that's that cutout, but the original array on line 5 is the only the remaining content here. So where slice was non-destructive, it returned a new array of this stuff. Splice returned the same array, but it actually cut out of the original. Does that make sense?
So one was destructive, one was undestructive. When you went to go log the original array, it was changed in one case and it wasn't in the other. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And I can do it again just to confirm, like slice is non-destructive. So I'll get a new array of this stuff on line 3, but line 5 will be everything still. So I'll refresh to confirm new array and the original array. Now, if I change to splice, I'll get this array, this part of the array on line 3, but it will actually only be the remaining on line 5. So refresh, and there it is. So it's actually altered this is the original, and it's been cut. Everything else has been cut out of it.
Just curious, really quick. Is the ordering of your code there going to have a difference, or make a difference in how the splice copy interacts with the original? Like in the sense that like you're telling them both to like kind of basically print out, but
Are you asking like if I put this here?
yeah,
or-
yeah, I was just
Yeah,
curious if it had.
it does. It absolutely matters. So like in this case, if I refresh this now, so this is, we know this is destructive splice. If I refresh this and refresh the page, right now, because JavaScript runs line by line, it's like,
Right.
okay, define the array, and then this is still that unchanged array, and now it's been altered.
Okay.
So I could actually, just to confirm too, console log it here and here. I'll get the original unaltered array, and then the same array but altered.
So basically, you're not going to see the altered original until it gets past printing the splice copy.
Really, it's what this process. I don't even have to log this necessarily. It's really just the key is that this process is altering the array. So
Right.
once JavaScript gets to this line, it destructively changes the values in the array.
Right, well, with the console log on there, you were doing two things at once, right? You're both making a splice copy and you're printing.
Yeah, exactly. So if I do this, you can just see the original before the splice and the original after the splice in this case, because I'm not logging there.
Okay, cool.
What do we call these dot logs or these dot splice dot push? Are these like array functions or
Methods, maybe?
Yeah,
methods?
they're called methods, but that's a good guess because they actually are functions. They work just like a function. You pass in arguments, and you'll see some of them are like even taking other functions and stuff. But it's kind of beyond the scope of pre-work. But the real secret is that everything in JavaScript is an object, which, if you recall, in the pre-work is defined by the curly braces. And even an array like this thing that we define here, it's an object, and objects can have stuff on them. And if you remember from the objects lab and the content, we have things that you can like write in a key value pair on an object, and that becomes a property of that object. Well, you can also create functions that are like this, like function, does something. This actually will become a valid method on this object I'm just defining randomly in the code. This is not fully valid code, so I'm not going to continue, but like that's basically what's happening is you're just calling something that's built into every array. Every time you define an array, it has this thing, this method built in. Same with console. Console is a thing too. It's actually an object, and it has a log method. Console also has some other ones too, like console, I think, dot warn. Yeah, just has a slightly different output. That kind of interesting.
What type of output is that?
It's like the same thing. Let's see what happens when we do it. We can run it in Node and see if it gives us anything slightly different. No. So this is particularly, this is the warn, this is the log. In Chrome, it does recognize it's slightly different, so it's giving you us this little like exclamation point.
Is that like is it like a verbose output or?
I don't know. There's actually, let's see. So console, JS console. There's a bunch of different ones you can run from console object. Here it is. So there's console count, console error. There's warn. There's log. Table's cool if you're ever actually, let's check out table while you're working with arrays. It's pretty handy. Get rid of this for a second. So right now I'm just going to console table this array. Pretty cool. It just outputs all the values. Hey, that's all the values that we defined in here. And it also outputs the index of them, so it can kind of confirm like arrays start at 0. Well, that's value 1. There's index 1 is actually value 2. Index 5 is another array.
How does console table look in Node? Is that any different?
Good question. Oh, wow, that's cool. It didn't actually log the array here. That's kind of weird, but at least it does do something nice. That's kind of funny. So yeah, like these are just methods on top of things in JavaScript. And in this particular case, like console is a predefined object in JavaScript that you can access. When you create an array, you're actually creating there's a predefined thing called arrays in JavaScript that you make a copy of. Basically, this is an instance of that effectively, and it gets all those methods with it too. Yeah.
One quick question before I forget. So for functions in general, when you have your function call at the bottom, is there any way to have that call just return the value once you put in your arguments, or do you always have to console.log and then function call within that?
Oh, so like you're saying like, let's write a function real quick. Example. Let's just make a very, very simple function. So you're saying is there any way to like, if I run this? Oh no, index.js, I don't get anything, right? Because like, is that what you're saying, that this doesn't actually
Yeah,
show
like,
up?
do we always have to put the function call inside of a console.log to be able to see it?
Yeah, pretty much. Because ultimately, like, console logging is for practice and for development. In the long run, you won't want to have those console logs unless you want to explicitly output something to the user. Your code, once it's working, you don't need to see it working. So like, that is true, though. You would have to always do
Okay.
to get output like this. You have to log it. Yeah. I mean, of course, like that with JavaScript in particular, JavaScript is built for the internet. So like the alternative would be DOM manipulation, so that it may not actually return anything here, but you can see it on a page because you've manipulated something, on the page, right?
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was like a return print or something inside the function that would just do it automatically, but
Oh yeah. When you get to the Ruby content, like there's a similar console log, but it's like you can do puts something like a string or print. Those are in Ruby, but yeah, for JavaScript, it's just console log and console whatever.
okay, good to know.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. What else can we talk about? Talked about arrays a bit. Do you feel good? Anything else about arrays you want to discuss or have questions about? No. Okay.
Yeah, I just know there's like the 8 methods, so I'll just need to reread. I guess, what would you say are the most used methods out of those?
Oh, like the push and the pop and stuff.
Yeah,
Probably push. Like arrays are
Okay.
really useful for when you need to like store a bunch of stuff temporarily. And so you'll often have code where you have to like, maybe you start out with an empty array. For instance, we might have a while loop that does something and like pushes a value into this array every time on the loop. Like that's very common. The other methods you'll learn eventually are like things like map, which is beyond pre-work, but map can actually take a function here and iterate through every element in an array and do something to it. Similar to how you do a loop. You might say, they'll say like an array 1, 2, 3. You could write a for loop that says like let I equals 0, I is less than array dot length. So like in this code right here will loop through the array and output everything, every element of the array in the terminal. So if I run node here, I get 1, 2, 3. There's also a way I could do this where it's actually, I could say map. Don't worry if this is unfamiliar, because this is phase 1. So I run the code now. I also get 1, 2, 3. This is doing the same thing as this, but the difference is this is a built-in method, and I'm passing in my own custom function. This function, the way it works, is it's basically we're saying this is a definition of function we want to call on every element of this array. So for every element 1, 2, and 3, this function is called, and that element is passed into the function, and then we can do stuff with it. In this case, we're just console logging. We can do whatever we want. The same things we could do in a for loop, we can do in here. So that map was a very common one. You'll see this a lot, especially when you get to like more advanced JavaScript, like in React. You might, for instance, have a list of, for instance, like say you're on a web page and you have a list of blog posts or comments or something. You might have them in JavaScript as data, and then you can map in an array, and you can map over them, and for every element in the array, create a div with some text in it or something like that. So like that's a way, an example of what you might use. Map is big, push is big for sure too.
That dot length, the array dot length, I see dot
Oh.
length a lot, but
Yes. Yes.
that basically, the length count starts at 1, right?
No, I think it should be it starts at 0. So this should be. Oh no, you're right. Oh, yes, you're right. I'm sorry. Yeah, so this would be array of length of 1, right? Because if it's empty, it's 0.
Okay.
Yeah, this is always one thing that kind of like gets a little bit confusing is if you're ever trying to access, let's say you have this array and you want to get to the last element of the array. Of course, you can always just log, like you can say, I want array this, the value at index 3 of this array, which would be 4, or just to be clear, A, B, C, D. All right, so index 3 of this array will be D. It's the 4th thing in this array. So get D. But if I didn't know the length of this array, I just wanted to still get the very last element, you can do array.length -1. D. Now, no matter what I do, it will just log the last value because length is always going to be the length of this array, but the index of this last value will always be 1 less because this starts at 0.
But the length count can be 0 if it's empty.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
Yep. Cool. What else about arrays? Nothing? How about, what about functions? Any questions you have about functions?
I know you can have functions within functions. They're called like
Yeah.
recursive functions or something. Are those used often?
Yes, there's a couple of different examples. There are things like recursive functions. I can show you an example of one, but there are definitely many examples where you'll see functions within functions, and often the more complex applications will just have, functions within functions within functions. The reason why is that functions that are side by side, like in this case, we have, let's see, example 1 and example 2. I can write stuff and write functions in here and like write behavior, code, logic, whatever I want in this example here. The stuff I write in this function here will only be accessible within this section of code, actually within these curly braces. So like I can't call, if I wanted to call inner function, I couldn't call it from inside of this other function here. It's not available in the scope of this function. This is also a topic that's in phase 1 really more, but like it is absolutely acceptable though. This is totally valid code to have a function inside another one. And actually there's a very particular things in JavaScript where you want this. You can actually return functions. So I can actually have code, like a function that returns another function. That's called a closure. We won't get into that too much right now, but it's pretty cool. It's actually super cool because it lets you like provide sort of private variables and things that you can't access except within like some other function. Anyway, so yeah, this is totally valid. What else can I tell you about functions? There are recursive functions are examples of things when you call the same function within itself. So like this type of thing right here, by console logged. If I call this outside of this function like this. I will define it here. So when I run this code, it'll load this definition up into the environment, into the stack, the heap of JavaScript. Then it will call this function, execute the code in here, log this thing, and then call itself again. And then log this thing, and then call itself again, log it, call it, log it, call it. So this will actually be an infinite loop. I don't really want to call it because it'll probably make my computer a little upset. But I can definitely show you like a non-infinite loop. Maybe, for example, I could do a countdown. Where I pass in a number. And I log that number. And then I call the same countdown function. But pass in the number -1. So here if I give it a starter number like 5, what should happen is I call it down here. This will become set to 5. It'll log 5 and then pass it in. This will become 4. Log 4, pass it in again, 3. So let's see if this works. Okay, it didn't work. Example. Oh, of course, I just didn't change the variable here. Sorry. Ah, cool.
Negative infinity.
It did. Yeah, it actually went through and it counted down. But what happened? It just kept counting and down. So it started at 5 and then went 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way down until it actually was smart enough to be like, okay, I think this is probably gonna stop. It didn't like that after a while. Maximum call stack exceeded. So actually what happened was this loop happened so many times that JavaScript was like, okay, we're at the limit, we're stopping. They recognize it. So yeah, you're right. There's a problem here that this doesn't count. This counts down infinitely. That's one challenge you get with recursion. So you have to always, one thing you'll see also like in interviews is set up a default case. So what it might do is like if num is equal to 0 or is less than 0, then return. I don't even care about our return. I just want to stop this function from continuing. So I'll just return nothing, or just write the function. Then the return keyword. Now, if I run this, as soon as it gets to 0, so it logs 5, runs this again, logs 4, runs again 3, 2, 1. Then 1 is logged, and then it passes 1 minus 1. Sets it to 0. This is still not triggered because it has to be less than 0. Logs 0, and then this becomes -1. And as soon as -1 is the number being passed in, and this condition is met, and the loop stops, the recursion stops.
Very cool. I don't know if people want to have more stuff on arrays, but the objects assignment was pretty tough for me to understand. So I don't know if we should hit that.
Yeah, for sure. I'm happy to do that. Yep. Yeah, so we actually have a video on like that lab a little bit. So I'll talk more in general about objects this time, maybe. So just like we talked about arrays, basic definition of an object is usually like this. And literal syntax uses curly braces here. Objects can contain key value pairs. So an array is like a list of things, right? But an object is more like a dictionary where you can set keys and values. So I can, for instance, give keys and values like this. I don't know. I'm trying to think of random words. You know, you can do whatever you want, and the keys typically are structured as just a word. They can be other things, but it's recommended you just stick to strings like this. You don't have to write the quotes around them, but that should also work. Let's see what this does. So I've just created this object. I'm going to log it. Yeah, so hello is valid. So this is valid, but you can do either one because JavaScript is smart enough now to know like it's going to just convert this into a string anyway. These are all going to be converted into string values. So create objects like this. The thing about that lab, we talk a lot about creating copies of objects and altering, just being destructive about an object and non-destructive. So there's a few things that I think are important to kind of understand with JavaScript. So actually, before I go into anything, does anyone have any questions so far about objects real quick? No? Okay, cool. I want to quiz you all real quickly on something that's kind of an important thing to think about. It's tricky, so it's okay if you don't totally understand this yet. But here I've created an object, a constant called obj. I'm going to create another one, obj2. I'm just going to set it to obj. So whatever this is, I'm going to assign it to obj2. Now, if I change a value, let's say I do obj2 hello is equal to 5. I console log this. I should see a change. This should, I'm logging this entire object because I've assigned it the same thing as obj here. I should see hello, this key set to goodbye. Refresh the page, and there it is. Hello, goodbye. What should I see if I'm logging obj? Should I see this, or should I see it say goodbye?
I feel like you should see the original. Wait.
Okay, good guess. Let's see. No. That's kind of weird. It's actually, so it feels like we're making a copy here. We are changing hello on this second object, but now just to confirm, these are both being changed, even though I'm only changing it on the second object. This is an important thing to be aware of. It's often a case of bugs in JavaScript. It's because when you're declaring things and reassigning them like this,
You need a different notation.
what's up?
You need a different notation.
Yeah, you do. If you want to actually like make an altered, you want to have these to be different, you need to use a slightly different notation. But the trick and the problem here is that, not really a problem, it's just the way that JavaScript is built. It's called, often referred to as pass by reference. When I'm declaring object2 here and assigning it to object1, this first object, it's not making a copy of this thing. It's going to point to the same object in memory. So that this just becomes the same thing as this. I just have two variables that point to the same object. And by reassigning hello, it's going to change both of them. This can be a very pesky bug if you make copies like this and not realize that you can alter some variable thinking you're only altering one, and you might actually be altering more than one. So there's a few ways you can get around this. So this is sort of like one of the reasons why we want to make copies of things. If we really needed a duplicate of this object for whatever reason, let's say we want to make a bunch of different versions of this object with different values in it that we don't want to just assign like this. We want to copy this somehow. So we can do this a couple ways. The original way would be object.assign. And then we pass in an empty object, pass in the object you want to copy, and this will return a new version, a new object. So let's just confirm this. If I refresh this now, I'm now passing an obj here and changing hello on the second object. So this one will be changed. This one should not be. This, the way object assign works is it takes in as many things and as many objects as arguments as you want. So you can keep adding more objects here. The first one you pass in is the object that's going to be worked on. So if I did this, just object assign object. I refresh this page console. They're both still the same thing. You can see that. So these objects are still the same because object assign alone does not make a copy, but by passing in an empty object here, we're actually creating an object, we're declaring one here, and then adding whatever values in this object exist into this new object here. So in the lab that you get to for the object lab, you do a lot of this where you have to make a copy by setting up this empty object. The alternative is the more modern JavaScript syntax, which would be this. Can anyone tell me what this is called and what it does?
Spread.
Yeah, it's a spread operator. Yeah. So what's happening here?
It's
Is it spreading the keys or the values from obj into a new object that is being assigned as obj2?
what he said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we're taking obj and spreading out all the things inside of it, this stuff here. And because we've placed it inside a set of empty brackets, curly braces here, it just creates an object with those things in it. So because I can confirm this, I'll go back to the browser and refresh. They're different objects now. With this syntax and with this syntax, I can add extra stuff in here. For instance, I can do key value pairs, whatever I want to do. Oh, I've already used hello. This will work in a similar way to this. I could actually do this in two ways just to confirm how this works. I can pass in key value objects, an object with key values like this. This is taking all three of these objects and combining them together. Or I can do this where it's just like I'm writing key value pairs and destructuring objects alongside each other. These will both work. And I can show you just to confirm. It's modifying object 2 by taking everything from object 1 and this stuff. This should do this exact same thing. Not sure if that was very helpful of an explanation, but the main point I'm trying to say is that you can use either syntax. They both will make a copy and break you out of this pass by reference issue that you have to get around.
So spread notation is preferred. It sounds like, right? Or spreading.
It's the newer one. It's definitely a little more concise for sure, and like it can be. I find it easier to read personally than having to like figure out this. Also, it's very easy to forget this rule about the first thing in here having to be like an empty object. In this case, I know I'm creating this object. I'm just passing stuff in. And you can have one very helpful thing about this is you can have multiple objects. and just combine them this way by just adding them, spread operating multiple ones here. So now if I refresh this, I should get that yes, no from the second object in here. And again, I can do that here too. It's just, this is just, I don't know, I find it a little easier to read than this structure. But they're both valid. So, yeah, let's see.
What exactly is dot notation?
So dot notation is just that because object, that's basically the standard way to access properties on an object. So you can just do dot something, and what will happen is JavaScript will expect this thing to be a key on the object. So if I, I can try something like a key that doesn't exist, and I will get undefined because it's like it doesn't see any value tied to this key. One reason why we talked about before, like array, push, and method. Methods are the same sort of structure. You can call them the same. If you had like a push method here, you could have a push function here that did console log.
Can you elaborate on the reasons for using the dot versus the other ones, like the dot versus the square bracket notation versus the spread? Because I know there's something with like hard coding or dynamic or specificity.
That's really all there is. That's the big part of it, is that if you use dot notation, you have to explicitly write something that's valid. So I have to do object lamp or object hello, otherwise it won't work. I have to, and what that means is I need to know what I'm looking for. This code is like, I need to know there's a hello here. There are ways, however, you can write more abstract code. Like for instance, I could write some code. Let's say I have this example here, but let's say I didn't know what was in here. There are ways to get, for instance, the keys of an object by doing object.keys. So if I log the output of this thing, I'll get the 3 keys, hat, lamp, hello, that are in this object. Well, I can iterate through this. So let's write a for loop. This returns an array. If you check out the returns an array. So I can actually say the length of this array. I've now created a for loop that will loop for every, as long as I is less than the length of this array, which should be 3 keys. And I can now access those keys one at a time. So let's see if I console log this. I should now get every key individually here. Cool. Well, now that I'm console logging it, now that I can get every key, I should be able to say obj and pass in that key, that whatever this returns, which at each loop it returns a string that is a key. Now I have an abstract code that will get every value, top 1 square. Oh, nope. Hold on, console log. So like in this case, I've written code where I don't actually have to interact with any of these names. What I've done instead is write code that's abstract enough that it can take any object and output. I can output the key here and the value. This is the key. So key is hat, value is top, key is lamp, value is 1, key is a low, value is square bracket, a square empty array. So like this, I don't care what the names are. Now I can write another object. And just change this to object 2. And now I just get that 1. So like the main thing about using square brackets, this is a little more of a complicated example, but the main thing about it is that you can pass in things like variables. So I can pass in a string, or I can pass in a variable here, and they'll still return the same thing. Whereas with a dot, I have to be explicit. And you can see the example I just gave, like you can write very abstract code that does, so that way you don't have to worry about what the data is in an object, you can just process it. Kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I kind of lost you on that very last point, but
okay. I'm sorry, I cut you off too, Matthew. Were you gonna say something?
If we did console.log obj, would that print out top comma 1 comma empty array, or would it print out the keys as well?
But I did like just like that?
Yeah.
That would give me everything.
Okay, so it shows the keys and values.
Mm-hmm.
And what constitutes an element? Is an element a key value pair?
Actually, elements would be like, I would refer to elements with like arrays, like these are all elements here. These are usually referred to as properties. The key value pair is often referred to as a property. It's a property of the object.
Okay, so objects have properties, not elements.
Yeah. And some properties can be data, like this case, these are all key value pairs containing data, and other properties can be methods, like functions.
Cool.
What else about objects? Oh, we talked spread operator. So like talked a little about the spread operator. We also will see it occasionally with things like arrays, for instance. So sometimes you'd see like an example. We could say something like, just curious, what happens when we run console log example? Or actually, you know what? That's actually an even simpler example than what I was doing. Console log ... array. Let's see what this does. 1, 2, 3. That's different than this, which is actually the entire array. Spread operator, when applied to like an array, actually takes the elements and breaks them out into their individual things and passes them in. So I'm gonna redo this. Let's see. So here I applied the spread operator on this array, which is an array of 3 things. I have a function here that has one parameter set, and I'm logging that one parameter. And if I look at the browser, it's only logging 1, because this spread operator is actually basically saying 1, 2, 3, because that's taking all these things and outputting them. So if I wanted to say like first, second, third, now I'm getting what the console log said before, which is just console logging the 3 elements in here. If I added a 4th, it won't work again. It'll still log just the first 3. That's not as common as you'll see as things like the using it with the curly braces. That's much more common. You'll see that a lot more in our course as well.
Yes. So the spreading will basically like print out or take out the pieces of the array up to the length of the parameter count. So if
Yeah.
parameters are 2, if there aren't enough parameters, then it's just going to give you the spread of like the first up to the parameter count.
Yeah, like, well, because like JavaScript just what'll happen is I'll show you without the spread operator, JavaScript will just ignore the extra steps. So if I said like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I passed in 5 arguments here, these values, and I log this, it's still gonna it's gonna ignore 4 and 5. If I don't put enough in 1 and 2, it's gonna give me a problem because I won't. Oh, actually, it didn't give me a problem. It just didn't know what to do to set for the 3rd value, so it became undefined. But if there's more than the values it needs, it will just ignore them.
Yeah, one question on functions for the default value or default parameter. It seemed like it was hard to like just print out the second argument and have like a defaulted first, but then just print out the second. There was some issue with that I was running into.
Oh, like if you
like it wouldn't get to it. Because basically if you don't have a if you have an empty first argument, then it like wouldn't go to the second.
Oh, sure. Yeah, like if you're trying to pass in, if you don't pass in a value for this, you mean? Or yeah. This definitely a tricky. There's some limitations for what you can set this to default here, but
right.
If this is not default, then like you kind of have to put something in for second. In this case, I have to put in a second value. Otherwise, I can't just do this. This is salmon. Oh yeah, so it doesn't like that at all. Yeah, so like you have, yeah. Though what's one reason why also you'll see if we do end up using default values ever, they tend to be set up at the end. So you end up all by just because of the behavior of JavaScript, like default values, you might have a mix where some are required and some can be optional and have a default value. But the default values will tend to always be at the end of the parameter list for that reason, because
Okay, yeah.
this structure I could pass in 1 or 2 things. This code's a little messed up, but yeah, that's a good thing to point out. Yeah, cool. Anything else you want to talk about?
The only other thing I could think of was the init in a while loop. I was just wondering if that is always going to be used in a while loop.
Oh, there's something like in here, or you mean like the condition in here, or what are you talking about?
Yeah, like an initial value, I suppose, like if you were counting down with a while loop. I guess init is not a built-in function, right?
No, that's probably written some. Yeah, that's like a function that is defined somewhere. Something like this. Yeah. So the while loop, the main thing to think about or to remember with the while loop is that you can do everything in either a for loop or a while loop. They both will do the same thing. The main difference is that a for loop, you set up all the conditions for the for loop, the criteria in the parameters. So you'd say like we've seen it a moment ago. You set up an initial value. You set up a comparison, a condition. It's like, array.length, for instance, and you set up an incrementer. So this will run for the length of this array, for instance. The while loop only needs a condition. So I could just have true. And that will always, this will have a loop that will always fire infinitely. You can also recreate this exact structure by just taking, what you do is you break out the initial value, set it up before the loop. The condition you put in the parameter here, in the incrementer, you put at the inside of the loop itself. So this will do the exact same thing as this. The major difference between the two is that because while loops don't, this explicitly requires those three conditions. This one doesn't, which is good and bad. It gives you more flexibility, but it also gives you the opportunity to just like make a very easy infinite loop. Like this will always loop forever because there's no incrementer. So like I'll just confirm console log. Here I have array. I'm looping through incrementing to I, and for every I, I'm gonna get the index array at that index here, and I can do the same thing here. So I should get 1, 2, 3, 4, and 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So they're both totally valid. I often found like in my own experience, and I feel like a lot of students say this too, for loops are a little easier to approach initially because what they do is they just like give you very clean boundaries of what you can do. I need to go through this thing and go through every single element, for instance. While loops are very handy when you get to more like intermediate or advanced JavaScript, where you might have like a loop that has some more complex condition here, or you could even have a loop that loops forever and returns when you when you do something you want to. Maybe you're checking a condition here inside, and if you find the right thing, then you return it. So it just gives you more flexibility, basically. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, essentially. It sounds like while loops are definitely useful still. They're not just an extra loop, right?
No, yeah, they're definitely useful for particular cases. Ultimately, though, like you can do everything in either one. And in JavaScript, even like if you in the under the hood systems, they're all loops. Even these loops are ultimately actually just like nicer presentations of for loops and behind the scenes, but they'll all work fine. Yeah. There's also the while, the do while, I think, but we don't, that one I don't usually use. And I feel like if you can't do it with one of these, then like, or you should be able to do everything with one of these, either one. Yeah. Cool. Other questions about JavaScript or anything? I see Corey, I think. Hey, Corey, thanks for joining.
How's it going? I just thought I'd sit in.
Cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, we've been talking about arrays and objects and some function stuff, loops. I'm trying to think if there's anything else it'd be good to talk about with y'all.
For sure, no pressure. I just I'm taking notes on objects right now, but I figured I'd sit in case there's some information or something.
Cool. Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, William, Matthew, any other topics?
And I can cut the rest of the clips up that you guys have.
Maybe while Corey, I apologize, Matthew, but while Corey maybe is trying to think of something to ask, I actually had to step away for a second, feed my dog while you were explaining to Matthew the contrast between for and while. Could you just recap that really quick?
Oh yeah, for sure. I'd be glad to. So in this case, this code I have here, these are actually two loops that do the exact same thing. In this case, I have the main difference between the two, and I'll just like kind of erase this to start over. So a for loop always requires the three criteria for it: the initial value, the condition, and the incrementer. So the initial value in this case, we're just setting the variable to 0. The condition is as long as this value I that we just set is less than the length of this array, then fire the code inside the block. And then the incrementer just tells the for loop how to increment every loop. So this code will go through this loop 4 times and out and log array at index 0 to start, then array at index 1, 2, and 3. So if I refresh this, I'll get 1, 2, 3, 4. While loop is the same thing. It's just that the conditions for these criteria are not explicitly required, but you can rebuild this exact same loop by just taking these 3 criteria and put them into the while loop. The main thing though is that the first one, the initialized value, is actually outside of the loop. The condition is the only thing you put inside here, and then the incrementer you always want to include in the loop itself. So this, if I put the console log here, this will also put out 1 through 4. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the for loop. This is the while loop. So they both will achieve the same goals. Basically what I've been recommending is there's a few things. If your for loops are kind of easier to handle when you're first learning, because it really explicitly says you need to set these things. And for a lot of time, early on when you're coding, what you need for loops is like, I need to get through this array and get through every element. For loops are great for that. Or I need to just like loop through a number through 10 times and do something 10 times. For loops, great for that. While loops are handy for when you get more complex things, like maybe you don't want to increment every time, you want to have some other condition that breaks out of this loop. You can totally customize it that way, or you could have an infinite loop very easily. I want to have a loop that says just like runs true, but and every time it loops, it goes and runs some kind of function, and either like maybe you could say like if this function, I haven't written this function, so that won't work, but or return, like this loop will run forever until this example function returns the condition that will cause this conditional to run, and then return done. Like this is a loop we can write without an incrementer and while. This won't work in for because you need a incremental. You need the incrementer here. So the main thing just to take away from that is that you can do either one for basically everything. While loops will be handy if you have to start implementing some really custom behavior in your loop.
Okay, so take the 4 for example of the for loop. It's saying it wants to run as long as I is less than the array length, and the array length is 4, correct?
Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Mhm.
And so if I equals 0, it would always be less than 4, wouldn't it? So how is it not an infinite loop?
Because of the third condition in the for loop is always require a for loop requires an incrementer of something.
Okay.
It could be an infinite loop. If I did this loop will start at 0. I is less than array length. Great. It will log it out and it will minus I. Well, now it's -1. It's still gonna be less than the array length. And so it will log out undefined because array at -1 is nothing. And then it will do it again, -2, undefined, -3, undefined. So there's certainly ways to get infinite loops in here, but because of for loop structure requires something here, it's more likely that you'll have, a way out of it. And it also is sort of a way to remind you like, oh, I need to put that in. It's very easy to write while loops, and it happens to everyone always really as a programmer like this, where you just forget to increment and then you run your program and your machine starts heating up because it's running an infinite loop. I think.
Okay, so I think it's the incrementers that I'm like fuzzy on.
This
So-
like plus thing. Okay.
Yeah, if you could just explain that really quick, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So I mean, just because like the incrementer is just because this loop, a loop is always built with some kind of condition, an incrementer is just the way we can break out of that condition in a standard way. We don't have to use an incrementer in a while loop, but like in a for loop we do. Incrementers, the the way plus is actually kind of like a dot method, like we talked about. What it does, let me get out of all these for a second. I++, oops, sorry, performs an operation on the variable, the plus performs an operation on the variable they're called on. So in this case, I++ adds 1 to the I. One thing that's important to note about plus that's kind of tricky is that these two logs will give you different values. Can you tell me, can anyone guess what these two might output?
If I is set to 0, would the console.log of the second one just be 1?
Yeah, so this is 1. This one, 0. I'll confirm that in the console, 0, 1. So plus is a particular method that does mutate the I, and we can see when it's called, it does change I to 1, but it returns the original. So if I did this, like say 10, I should now get 10 here and 11 here. 10 and 11. So plus is just like another method. But importantly, it operates on the thing and it returns the original. You could do an incrementer in a similar way. We could just say I is equal to I plus 1. This will work the same way in these loops. So I can say this. This will still work. This is what we're doing, is providing just some commands here, an expression in this case, for what to do at the end of every loop. It doesn't have to be plus. It could be this. It could be plus equals 1. So these are just different ways to do the same thing. And plus is just typically what you'll see in loops as a shorthand way to do it. But also importantly, because we just talked about that console thing, important to note. The way a for loop must work is that in the same way with an I loop, with this loop, like this happens and then the loop starts over and it checks this condition. And because it's not actually checking the output of this, it's just changing it at the end of the loop, and then the loop starts over and it checks and sees if the condition is still valid. That makes sense. So like just to just kind of re-explain, in the while loop, it's the same structure here. We meet the condition in a loop, it executes the code, and as the final thing in the code, it increments. I could do this. But the main thing is that I changes. And then when the loop starts over, I is checked again against array.length, and then we will, what it decides whether or not we will run this code again.
Okay, so does the plus plus incrementer, is it acting as a counter, or is it just adding one? And so basically each time the loop cycles, it's just like reading one. So it's just like, that's what I'm trying to wrap my head around is.
Yeah, it's just incrementing. It's not checking anything. It's just like this for loop. The first time when you first start the loop, it does fire this initializer. That's the only time it ever runs. Then it checks the condition. The condition is true initially, so it runs the code. Then it calls the incrementer, and then the loop starts over. It checks the condition, runs the code, calls this incrementer. And as long as the condition is as true at the beginning of every loop, it'll call this incrementer at the end.
Okay, so when you showed the output a moment ago,
Yeah.
It only showed just 1, 2, 3, 4, just the one time. So does that mean that because it's just showing true once and it's not like counting to like or taking anything away or adding anything, it's just showing the array once because it's true once, and then there's nowhere for it to go? Is that?
I'm not sure if I follow what you mean. Like in this case, so in this case I'm just logging because it might be easy also if we can kind of like pseudocode this out. So in the first loop, we can think about this. I is initialized at 0. So the first loop, I is equal to 0. 0 is less than the array length, which is 4. So that's true. This isn't gonna get fire yet. So in the first loop, I is equal to 0. And then what that means is array at 0 is gonna be this value here. So if we're console logging array 0, we'll get 1. On the second loop, then at the end of that first loop, I is incremented to 1. So the second loop, I is equal now to 1. It's still less than 4. And so array at index 1 is now 2. It might be easier just to convey with letters here. So in this case, that's A, this is B, third loop. I is now equal to 2. Array at 2 is equal to index 2 is C. So this is called once. This is checked at the beginning of every loop, and this is called at the end of every loop. And because we're saying we're just like looking at array I, because I changes on every loop, we can get each of these values out of the array. Does that make sense?
And it's not resetting between each cycle or whatever. Or...
No.
I think we're maybe on the subconscious level where I'm getting confused. I might be getting a counter confused with a loop.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no, this is only called once, and I will change throughout the loop in this case. Yeah, every loop will actually change, will alter that value.
And I is pretty much the that's the designated value or string or whatever for
Oops.
it's like the default index function or whatever, right?
Yeah, you'll see that a lot. I mean, this is just like a particular, but you can call it whatever you want. You can call it, well, beef. This will work too. A, B, C, D. The variables are just, the JavaScript doesn't care what you call it. The main thing is like you typically want to call it something that's used, that's like relative, informative of what it is. So in loops, you will see like n is also one that comes up a lot. Probably is better to declare it as like a descriptor, a descriptive name, like counter. You can call it counter or index if you want. So but this might be actually better for our purposes because we're actually literally looking at the index of an array. So we'll just create an index instead of a 0 and increment it every time. This is a little more descriptive of what we're actually doing. So index will be better in this case. Yeah. Questions, further questions, more other things.
Are you gonna make these videos? Are you still recording them? Are you gonna make them available on like YouTube or something?
Yes, I still owe for last week's video, but I will put them up and on YouTube. There's also some other videos as well if you're in the Slack community channel. There's a JS pre-work library.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
this has some of the other videos in there. There's some JavaScript reviews and also object reviews as well. That's more in-depth on objects.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta watch all those. Those look really good.
Good. Yeah, they're like the previous study halls and stuff like that. This one, since we kind of like jumped around, I might end up cutting this one up a bit and putting in like some array stuff and object stuff separately. But I'll share it all out here as well. Cool. All right, y'all. Well, that was a good study hall. Good stuff to talk about. The way these work typically is we go through like an hour and a half of instruction and review, and then we just leave it open to all of you. So if you all want to take this time to work together, if you're all like want to review a particular topic, one of you can share screens. We are going to step out and let you all do your thing. I think I'll stick around in the room, but I'll go off camera and off mic. And yeah, I hope you all have a good time. Do you have any final questions or anything I can help with before I head out?
I think I'm good.
Cool.
What time are you going to be around on like Slack and stuff until today?
I mean, I'll be here probably for another half an hour or so.
What about like on Slack?
On Slack, I mean, we'll be available until 9, but I may not be. But Blake will be here.
Got you. Okay. All right. Yeah, I was just curious if I had any questions with like the last bit of stuff.
Okay, sure. Yeah. Definitely message me. Can't guarantee I will be there, but I will respond if I'm here.
Understood. Appreciate it.
Sure, for sure.
Thanks a bunch.